Welcome back. I'd like to introduce my guest, Catherine Musakali. She's a corporate governance expert. She served as the chairman of the Capital Markets Authority. That's, of course, the CMA Corporate Governance Steering Committee. She's currently a member of the Capital Markets Master Plan Implementation Committee and also the immediate past chairman of the Institute of Certified Public Secretaries of Kenya. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Of course, the role of directors is that of stewardship. You know, they are responsible for managing or in some statutes supervising the management of a corporation. Now, of course, a lot has happened in Kenya over the last few weeks, putting the role of directors and of shareholders you know, on the spotlight. How visible are they within management?
Terry, and thank you for having me this evening and to speak about a topic I love. The role of the board. I think the role of the board is a role that has greatly been misunderstood over time, and it is a role that really can bring very good returns to the company if well exercised. However, the role of the board cannot be exercised in isolation. Management have a particular role to play, the board itself has a particular role to play, but shareholders as well have a role to play. For a company to be successful, the three have to play their roles very, very well. So you cannot, for example, say if there is a failure in an organization, that it is the board that has failed. Each case has to be looked at in its own entirety for us to determine actually what went wrong. However, in the past few months or perhaps a year or so in Kenya, a lot has happened. One, first, to just capacity build for boards. We have seen codes of corporate governance coming into play. We have last year we had Mwongozo, the Code of Corporate Governance, that was launched by His Excellency the President, just to shore up capacity in boards for state corporations. This year we have seen the Code of Corporate Governance practices for listed issuers of securities in Kenya, and it is all about providing capacity, providing information, not just to the boards, but also to shareholders as well, with regard to the role that they need to play. And of course, there is also the stewardship code, which is in the making, and that code will put particular emphasis on institutional investors who are sort of looked at as elite investors, because they ought to know their role, and therefore they ought to place particular requirements on boards in terms of delivery.
Now, Catherine, you've talked about the different roles that each member, say, of an institution has to play. That's from the board to the management to the shareholders and even the stakeholders. But I guess the biggest responsibility does sit with the board. If we look at what has happened, you know, within the last 9 months, for instance, in the banking sector, yes, we'll question the stakeholders for perhaps not looking through the numbers properly, but doesn't the buck stop with the board? Or shouldn't the buck stop with the board?
Again, it would be wrong to sort of use a single brush to just paint all the boards and say, well, they have failed. Every case needs to be looked at. Yes, the buck stops with the board, because ultimately the shareholders have put in money and have said to the boards, we would like you to manage this organization. So in a number of ways you can say the buck stops with the board. But we need to ask a number of questions. One, was the board aware of its role?
But shouldn't they have been aware of their role? Yes,
indeed, they ought to have been aware of their role. But again, did the shareholders elect the right people to the board? That's important. Did we have a board that was balanced enough in terms of skill, in terms of experience, in terms of diversity elements such as gender, such as age, so on and so forth, depending on what the desired skills for a particular company is. So if, for example, you put me in a board that I have no clue about my role, I'm actually doing a disservice to that company because I don't understand, I don't have the skills to run the company, and therefore there must be a very proper fit for every organization. When you're choosing directors, you must ask the question, does this director fit on that board?
Let's talk about that a little bit, because you know, boards have been widely understood to be rubber stamps, you know, for the chairperson and for the CEO, and this would be people who are just ready to pass whatever the chairman wants, whatever the CEO wants. And in the case of government, boards are looked at as board positions are looked at as rewards. So how can, you know, despite all these things you have said and developments that are happening within the corporate governance space, how can we see that reflecting in reality on the ground?
I think the beauty about corporate governance in Kenya is that stakeholders are now asking the right questions. In the past, yes, you might have said that boards were seen as rubber stamps for management, but that's not always the case. Sometimes boards are not aware of their role, but other times they are actually aware of their role, but certain things have gone out of hand that perhaps were not within their control. So first and foremost, we've got to ask ourselves, given where we are now, given the codes that we have in place, given the law that we have in place, are we at a stage where we are saying, going forward, we are going to see less of these things happening? And I want to believe we are. However, the issue of corporate governance, and I keep saying this, is not a question of laws, rules, regulations. It's a question of the heart and the mind. Do I believe that what I'm doing is the right thing to do? Do I have the value system that goes with being a trustee? Because the board is actually a trustee for shareholders. Do I have the skills? Do I have the capacity to manage? So that's really what we should focus on. It's not the law. It is the heart and the mind. I believe there is a value that comes with corporate governance, and therefore I'm going to do the right thing because that's what I ought to do.
Let's talk about shareholders. And in the sense, you know, both in listed companies and companies that are not listed, which have a lot fewer shareholders, what is their role?
Shareholders have very many roles to play. First and foremost, shareholders appoint the board. So let's start from there. Shareholders appoint the board, and therefore shareholders must make sure that they're appointing the right people with the right dynamics on the board. That's one. Secondly, shareholders appoint auditors. So shareholders also have to make sure that they're appointing the right auditors. Three, shareholders are the ones who actually approve the financial statements. So are they asking the right questions when we come to the AGM? Do they have the capacity to, have they been given the knowledge and the information they need to actually ask the right question? That is important. And that's why for me this stewardship code is so important, because institutional investors are people who really ought to know what questions they should ask. So just in a nutshell, those are the few things that shareholders ought to do. They question the board about their investments, and they're entitled to responses. And of course, I guess, you know, the answer to the question as shareholders asking the right questions is, you know, perhaps a plain no in the situations that we have seen unfolding over the last few months. And the question, I guess, is, you know, then have boards become ungovernable? No, I wouldn't say that boards have become ungovernable. And I think in the recent past, and that is why I think we are heading in the right direction, because people are asking the right questions. And even for the boards, it is a question of, do you have the skills to ask the right questions? Do you have the information? These are people who may be coming to the companies 4 times in a year. During those 4 times, do they get the opportunity to get the information they need to make the correct decisions? Do they have, across the board, say we have 12 people, do they have the required skills the right skills mix. Do we have an accountant? Do we have a lawyer? Do we have somebody who understands, who has the business skills? Do we have, you know, all that is really, really important. But straight to your answer, I would say no, board not become ungovernable. And in my experience in the recent past, I think everybody who is appointed to the board and given the liabilities that come with a board position is actually interested in doing the right thing, because the consequences with the coming in of the Companies Act 2015 are actually grave for boards.
All right, Cap, the situations that we last 9 months, of course not having a blanket statement, you know, where boards are concerned. But what are some of the key lessons as we wrap up that you have learned, you know, as an expert in governance?
I think the first thing is that when you are appointed to the board, understand your role. Understand the business, ask the right questions, get to know the managers, get to know the stakeholders that you need to get information from. 2, do not shy away from getting expert advice when you need it. Use your company secretary. That's the governance expert on your board. Use them. Don't just let them write minutes. Use them to give you governance advice. The other thing that I would say is this whole issue about governance audits. Get what has been happening is actually the right thing, or if it's not the right thing, you can then put the right processes in place in terms of governance. So that's what I would say. And then shareholders, of course, participate that you're putting the right people in. Check the background of the people you're putting in. Make sure the skills mix is actually right for that particular board.
All right, Catherine, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us tonight. Chairman of the Capital Markets Authority Corporate Governance Steering Committee, as well as the past immediate chairman of the Institute of Certified Public Secretaries of Kenya. Thank you so much for being on the Citizen
Thank you for
Business
having me
tonight.
Thank you.